What is going on, guys? It's Nick from Surfcast and the Island back at you with another video. Today's topic of discussion is going to be something I may or may have not gotten into much depth on, but that is going to be structure. With, a couple more seasons under my belt with more experience, in time, it has taught me that beach structure and locating beach structure and how it relates to the area that you're fishing, I'd say is probably one of the most, if not the most significant factor when it comes to being more and more successful as a surfcaster. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm aware in the beginning of this video, I coined the term beach structure. It is not limited to just the beach. This could be back bays. This could be pockets relating to the backside of jetties. It could be whatever you want it to be. Structure as a whole is anything that is not considered flat or is irregular to the commonalities of an area that you're fishing, so to speak. In this video, it's going to be mainly dominated upon, I'll talk about soft structure. I could go on and on about different types of structure. I'll make separate videos going forward, so on and so forth. But what is soft structure? Soft structure is sandbars, cuts in sandbars, holes, ditches, created by the forces and currents of the beach. They can vary from storm to storm, as these sand bodies and whatnot can be moved around from year to year and period to period, whatever you want to conceptualize. Hard structure, on the other hand, is much more consistent. Rocks, jetties, mussel beds, things, regardless to storms, they tend not to move nearly as much. But like I said, we're going to talk about soft structure. Soft structure is also very volatile. One storm could wipe it out, and the beach that you were once fishing that season could be, goodbye to that, piece of the beach. And you'll have to go and find something else in that regard. But I'd say we'll start with sandbars. That's the most notable beach structure. To start with, there's subcategories that go off that, but a sandbar is just, it's pretty much a change in depth contour from shallow to deep or deep to shallow. And depending on the tide and which way the tide's moving and how it sets up to that depth change will dictate what tide, et cetera, is favorable to that particular area. Okay, so generally speaking, we can't talk in absolutes because there is always an exception to some sort of rule or some sort of principle that sets up to what we're fishing or how we're fishing it. But from what I've found in the past couple years or so being out there, generally speaking, the open beach typically produces better on an outgoing or ebb tide, have you will, when the water is pulling out of, a barrier island or down the beach. Okay. Common sense says that the further you go in the water, say you walk in the water, the deeper it gets, the deeper it gets. Starts off shallow, progressively goes deeper, 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 deeper. So take, for example, if you have a breaker that comes up, a wave, and it rolls for 20, 30, 40 yards, there is absolutely no irregularities in front of you. There is absolutely no structure. But the only chance that you may have in that particular area is, maybe casting beyond the breakers where that wave is breaking, where there could be depth change, okay? Anything beyond the breakers, yes, that could be structure. And on an outgoing tide, say in that area from deep to shallow, water pushing over shallow, flat into deeper water, that could cause an outgoing bite, or it will cause an outgoing bite if there's fish and bait in the area. But there are a select few of areas that can produce on an incoming bite. That being, that outer bar, that outer wave breaking can push into deeper water. You may have deeper water in front of you. A way to tell that is if you have a breaking wave, if you have a very fast pitch where that wave comes up and within, 10 yards, that wave comes back down, 5, 10 yards, up, down, boom. Beyond that crest of the wave, there's very deep water in front of you. Okay, that's a trough. The fish will use the beach lip to ambush whatever they're feeding on, whether it's menhaden, herring, sand eels, sand fleas, whatever. That's not the purpose of this video. Fish will use the edges of the bar or any type of irregularity to give them the best opportunity to ambush and successfully feed up during the tide. Those are just two examples of how to, determine, okay, I have an outer bar that pushes into far deep water. That's going to be most likely an outgoing bite. If I find an area with deep water, I'm saying, waist to chest high, walking 10, 15, 20 feet out, that's pushing over a shallow bar, that might produce an incoming bite in certain instances, which will make me touch upon the next factor, which I'm going to get into right now. So now that we have a generalization of what sandbars are and how they may set up to a certain tide based upon depth, the thing I look for on a beach in particular is the slope of a beach. Beach slope is very important because that is a dead tail giveaway that, there's deep water close to the shore. The steeper that pitch gets to the beach, chances are, even at lower phases of the tide, fish can withstand the depth there. And again, tips to, find these certain areas, nooks and crannies within a beach. Best bet is to go, especially if you can time it around the moons, bottom of the tide, especially if you have wind against tide, that'll really accent where the wave breaks are and where the flats and dips and holes and cuts, so on and so forth are. So say if you go to a beach, dead low, especially around a moon, and there's still a good amount of water there, chances are maybe the last 3 of the out or the first 3 of the in could be very productive here. Not saying the top of the tide you can't catch fish, but maybe there's elsewhere that you could try. So on the vice versa flip side of that, say you excuse me, say you go to another spot related to the beach or backside of a beach, and you go at the bottom of the tide and you realize you catch your plug, you're going to be kicking sand. That could be a dead giveaway that, maybe I need the top 3 of the incoming or the first 2 to 3 of outgoing for this spot, depending on how that structure sets up to the tide pushing over it. So that is something else to consider. Just because it's an outgoing bite or incoming bite, the vertical rise and fall of water, that height during when you're fishing could play a very big role in determining should I fish here or should I not. So that's pretty much another factor that I look at depth-wise of where I'm fishing. Okay, now that I got the idea of the vertical rise and fall of water, which is also known as tide, across the table, the next point I really want to hit on, which bleeds perfectly into this concept, is whitewater and how whitewater is caused based upon sandbars and wave breaks. Um, this may not, you know, this may not apply to a really rough day where there's wave breaks all over the place. But in general, bass love whitewater. They much rather feed in rough, turbulent conditions as opposed to calm conditions, for the most part, from what I've found. So let's take a calm day, for example, where, yes, as the tide drops, the more and more that wave break will accent a blanket of white water. Even on a calm day, the slightest bit of blanket put across the surface of the water by a wave, the bass will use as an advantage to feed. So maybe at the higher end of the tide in that area, for example, there's not nearly as much, if at all, any white water. But as the time, as time goes on and that sandbar gets more exposed, especially around the moon tide, the more and more that bar and that wave break will expose white water in front of where you're fishing and where your plug should be. A funny thing was, I did have a certain night where I showed up a little early because I wanted to get there early. I knew it was going to happen. It was about 4 hours from the bottom of the tide, and I kid you not, by, another hour, hour and a half in, so the last 2.5, 3 hours of the tide, that made all the difference from that bar that I was trying to hit and expose the white water as more and more came up over the bar break. That made the difference of me catching and me not. 100%. It concentrated the bait more depth-wise, and from what I believe and from what I've seen the past couple of seasons, it definitely played a role. So not only will, depth change concentrate the bait and assist in game fish ambushing the bait, it'll also, produce a weapon in the game fish's favor. The white water will actually literally stun, especially smaller bait in that regards. So it's very important to, key into those certain factors. So it could make the difference, believe me. Okay, so I guess the last thing I would like to touch upon factor-wise, I'm not going to give it too much time because, yes, it is important. But I believe that, the points I've stressed beforehand kind of had a pretty big influence on where this discussion is going direction-wise. But wind and wind factor play a very big role, especially on the South Shore beaches, of, how that beach, tide and bite is going to set up to that particular area. But generally speaking, anything northerly and westerly in terms of winds is pretty much going to flatten the beach out. So you're not really going to see much white water in those directions. Anything northeasterly, easterly, southeasterly is going to, even southwest, anything out of the south, anything out of the east or northeast will tend to produce more white water than a north or westerly wind ever could. The speed of the wind will have a very big effect on waves and wave breaks. So in essence, to summarize, wind factor will affect wave action. That's pretty much the gist. So if you want white water, you want a lot of white water for a certain area, southerly winds, easterly winds, northeasterly winds at a pretty steady clip will cause white water. not so much as the latter. So that in essence could cause more whitewater, like I said, and could possibly extend the bite in other circumstances. So that's pretty much it. I don't really have much else in the tank to talk about. That was pretty lengthy, in-depth conversation and discussion about, tide and how it could set up to a certain structure. So if you have any other questions or you have any other video requests, please reach out and have a good one.